Hi everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday evening lecture series here at the Design Research Department. I'm Molly Heinz, and I'm the co-chair of the department, along with Alice Trumlow, who is currently in Amsterdam. So, as I always say, here with us in spirit, if not in body. And I realized in preparing for today that we are halfway through the semester, and we're on November 3rd this evening, and we're going to have a great presentation by Kaganskiy, who I'll tell you more about in just a second. And I wanted to also flag that November 10th, next week, we're not having an outside lecturer come in. We are actually going to be presenting from the inside out. We're having our annual open house. So we'll have presentations from faculty and some alums and some of our current students as well to tell prospective students and friends of prospective students more about the program and what they could expect if they enrolled in our MA. And I also want to bring your attention to a late addition to the program on December 15th. We have Mark Hansen, who's the director of the Brown Institute at the Columbia Journalism School, coming to talk about data as narrative. So be sure to mark your calendar for that. Also, we're restarting our brown bag lunch series next Tuesday as well. Since we're not having a speaker come in the evening, we're actually having someone come in for our lunch, actually a group from Frontier Design, Canadian-based design group that is doing some pretty interesting work that crosses both design and editorial platforms. That starts at 1:30, and it will be held not in this room, but in our seminar room next door. And if you come to our open house later that evening, you'll see design and all its manifestations, or hear about design and all its manifestations, and our definition of design, which is really broad, and how we approach study of it, writing about it, and critiquing it. Quick snapshot of the program. It's a year-long program in 2 semesters. We have good funding for the program at this point in time, so if you apply, you are likely to get a scholarship. We not only are working here in the classrooms, but we go off-site a lot to do site visits. We have lots of great guest lecturers coming through, as you've seen. Quite a few assignments and one big fat thesis, which is backed up by a lot of reading. Our faculty is pretty fantastic, and the big draw for a lot of prospective students. We have a lot of active writers, editors, journalists, thinkers that are out in the field working and then come in to teach the students. And probably some names you recognize on this list. You can find out more about our faculty on our website. And this is another just quick thumbnail sketch of what we're doing day to day in the program. I'll draw your attention to the literature review, which is the big assignment that the MA students have due by midnight tonight. So I think I see maybe 1 or 2 in here. A lot of them are out in the studio working, and maybe will join us for a drink. But this is sort of the preliminary step to their thesis proposal, which is due in about 6 weeks. So this is where they bring together a lot of their research and secondary sources and start to try to explain how they're relevant to the argument that they're planning to create. In terms of applying to the program, it's pretty straightforward. Transcripts, letter of recommendation, a written statement, and a writing sample, and a resume. We give priority to applications that are in by the 15th of January. And you can learn more about all of this on our website, which, if you go to it, should look different every time you see it, in theory. The background actually was discussed in our lecture last week by Marco Ferrari from Folder Studio, and he was talking to us about actually this particular image that represents the internet. And
I talked too.
oh, Oh yeah, well, we have a theme happening this fall. So anyway, you can find out, if you missed Marco's lecture, you can you'll be able to find the video on our website along with the videos of every other lecture we're videotaping tonight. And I wanted to give a shout out to Victor De La Cruz, who is our AV technician. Thank you, Victor, for all your great work. So Victor will be posting this season's videos in the coming weeks. We'll also have our open house video posted in case you missed that. All right, so after this evening's lecture, after our presentation, we'll have a short Q&A that I'll kick off, and we'll open it up to the audience. And then you'll join us next door in our studio space for some drinks and refreshments, and to continue the conversation with our lecturer, who is Julia Kaganskiy. And Julia is the director of New Inc., the incubator at the New Museum that focuses on art, design, and technology. And if you've been paying attention to that intersection of art and technology over the last few years, especially in New York, I have no doubt you know Julia's name, or at least know her work. She founded the Art Techs Meetup, a group that brings together professionals from New York City's museums, galleries, and art-related startups, also digital artists, together to have conversations and create. She has worked with MoMA's digital learning department to create educational experiences around the collection, both on web and mobile. She founded Blue Box Gallery, a mobile pop-up gallery that focuses on computers creating real-time art. She notably was hired by Vice to be the global editor of the Creators Project, which is a website that I look at every day, and some of you probably do too, for inspiration. And that's an ongoing partnership between Vice Group and Vice Media Group and Intel. And that's just a few of the things that Julia's been up to in the last few years. She's also very young, I might add, to have accomplished so much. And she's been rightly cited by Fast Company magazine and Business Insider as one of the most influential women in technology. And she's been profiled by the amazing PBS series Makers, which honors women leaders. So I met Julia a couple of years ago. She was launching New Inc. And she's just one of those people who can create amazing and also fruitful cross-disciplinary connections, which is really why we're thrilled to have her here this evening talking about networks as generators of creativity. So please join me in welcoming Julia Kaganskiy.
Thanks, Molly. I'm really glad that it's dark in here, because every time somebody reads my bio, I just turn bright red. How's everyone doing? Good. Thank you for having me. The title of tonight's talk is actually, as articulated by Molly, I believe, Networks as Generators of Creativity, or Creativity as Generator of Networks, as Joshua Dechter, one of my Twitter followers, suggested today, after I decided to crowdsource part of this talk on Twitter to kind of more actively live up to its name. Another great suggestion was to include cat gifs, which I neglected. I don't know how I managed to do that. This idea of networks as sources of creativity is probably one that feels maybe obvious to you. The thing that I would add to that title is interdisciplinary networks, maybe, diverse networks. That's been something that's been consistent throughout my work, this kind of fusion of different groups, different communities that on the surface may not think that they have a lot in common with each other, but I feel like get a lot of value out of being put in context and in contact with one another. So the Meetup group that Molly referenced, Arts, Culture, and Technology, this is a group that I started shortly after coming to New York in 2008, and it was looking at how technology was impacting the arts. And there were all of these groups, even within this niche area, that were not talking to each other. There were museum professionals working with technology, there were art-centered startups, there were galleries who were trying to figure out what to do with this social media thing, there were artists who were exploring these tools, and they like stayed in their own little silos and they didn't talk to one another. And that was crazy to me. So I started bringing people together in this meetup group, and very quickly it turned into this vibrant community that grew to over 4,000 people. I no longer run it. I've since passed it on after taking over New Ink, which is basically like a 24-hour, 24/7 meetup group that never ends, which is both great and also challenging in ways that I didn't expect. But through this kind of investigation into how art and technology were influencing each other, I then had the opportunity to work as the editor of the Creators Project, which exposed me to this idea of networks as generators of creativity from a different perspective. So many of the artists and technologists that we were featuring on this platform were working in open source communities. These are communities that are bringing together people from a variety of disciplines around creative coding libraries like processing and open frameworks that are essentially contributing to developing kind of a coding framework that's essentially kind of like building blocks that you can use to create really complex interactive installations, media experiences, data visualizations, websites, all of these things. And it was amazing to see these communities develop a new language through, again, that interdisciplinary exchange of ideas, that fusion, but also this global exchange of ideas, because even though open frameworks and processing started here on the East Coast, one out of MIT, or has roots in MIT, the other one out of Parsons actually, they have users and contributors from all over the world, and so they are really the product of this kind of hive mind, the way that many other open source libraries are, like Linux, which are maybe more well known. And so that has been kind of a major driving force behind my work and interest, and has been one of the things that has led me to New Ink at the New Museum. And New Ink is a shared workspace and professional development program. We occupy 8,000 square feet in the building adjacent to the museum on the second floor. We are first and foremost an interdisciplinary community. We have almost 100 creative practitioners who work out of our space. They're exploring the intersection of culture and technology. And they're investigating new modes of creative expression, sometimes inventing new tools, inventing new platforms, new processes, as well as new business models, which I think are really necessary, especially when you're working in emerging fields, emerging markets. As a program, we're only about a year old. We launched in September of 2014. And in some ways we're still in the process of refining and identifying our identity. But at the heart of it, for me at least, is this underlying belief that artists and designers are integral to helping us invent the future that we want to live in. And too often they're kind of not really brought to the table, especially in a very kind of engineering-focused innovation culture. And as creative practitioners, we deal in the humanities. We get at the core of what it means to be human, to be a person living on this planet in the year 2015. We focus on the things that make us relate to one another and make sense of the world around us. And John Maeda, one of New Ink's advisors, former president of RISD and the first ever design partner at this venture firm, KPCB, says that innovation doesn't just come from equations or new kinds of chemicals. It comes from a human place. Innovation in the sciences is always linked to a human experience, and human experiences happen through engaging with the arts. And that may seem obvious to us. I mean, I take this room for granted because we're at SVA. But it doesn't seem to be the norm in, again, the engineering-dominated culture of Silicon Valley. And when I tell people that I run an incubator, like, this is what comes to mind. They're like, oh yeah, you know. But even in the wake of Steve Jobs and Johnny Ives and, you know, living in this age of like chief creative officers and design thinking disciples, the arts have kind of never been more undervalued. Like, you know, budgets are being cut all over the place. I've met with an NEA grant officer like 2 weeks ago, and she's like, yeah, our budget's about half of what it was 10 years ago. It's crazy. And it's a shame, because sometimes, you know, if we're forced to give an example of like, what is the value of the arts, you know, sometimes artists come up with pretty amazing ideas that are quite possibly ahead of their time, or envisioning a new kind of future that maybe we don't even realize. And this is an example of a project done in 1978 called Aspen Movie Map. It was created by an artist and filmmaker working in research labs around the world, such as MIT, Media Lab, and Banff Media Center. And it was created kind of as an artistic experiment. He had this idea to set up a 360 camera rig on the back of a station wagon and drove it through the streets of Aspen, capturing the town on 16mm film. He then hacked a laser disc to map the footage onto an actual map of the city, allowing users to virtually navigate and explore the city streets. And so this project, which at the time was dismissed as a waste of taxpayer money, as these things often are, ended up kind of unwittingly laying down some of the conceptual and technical groundwork for Google Street View some 30 years later, which has been heralded as a majorly transformative technology. I think that artists and designers are always valuable people to have in the room because they're divergent thinkers. They expand the horizon of possibilities. They aren't simply focused or motivated by utility and execution, which can often constrain and limit our thinking. They're able to explore a wider range of ideas, which ultimately leads to a greater number of insights that can then be distilled down into actionable steps through that equally important process of convergent thinking, because you can't be in brainstorm mode forever. And you know, this is a process that in 1964, neuropsychologist Roger Sperry kind of drew an analogy between neurons and ideas. He says ideas cause ideas and help evolve new ideas. They interact with each other and with other mental forces in the same brain and neighboring brains, and thanks to global communication and far distant foreign brains. So in essence, the greater the diversity of ideas we have access to, the more likely we are to develop new knowledge and insight, which allows us to combine and recombine ideas to form new ideas. It's kind of iterative process. And what Sperry is describing sounds to me a bit like a rhizomatic model, or a case for like rhizomatic innovation. So one that, unlike the linear model of the root tree here on the left, doesn't chart causality along chronological lines, but rather allows for many connections to exist in multiple directions at once, combining and recombining to form something new. And that collision is something that we are accustomed to on a daily basis through the network landscape of the internet. You know, we're now living in a state of constant stimulus from a wide array of sources and inputs, provided our online media diet is varied enough and not just feeding us a pre-filtered version of what we already know and want to see, which is increasingly the case with like targeted algorithms on Facebook and Google, but it's a whole other discussion. But you know, we're likely to encounter all kinds of new ideas and open ourselves up to these sparks of inspiration that lead us to invent something new or to have new insights. But for me, and I know for a lot of people, I think the trouble with the internet is that it can often be overwhelming or impersonal, and synthesizing all of this information into anything really meaningful can be extremely difficult because you're constantly being pulled in a million different directions. And which is why I prefer the coffee house model. For me, bringing it back into reality, into physical space, into interacting with people is always a crucial next step of the process. That's why New Ink for me is kind of like the ultimate next step of my work. It started with a Meetup. It went online into Creators Project, which was a global platform. We had editors in 7 different countries. We had a global events festival. We were trying to capture all of the world's like creativity and technology, how technology was helping to spur and invent new forms of creative expression. And it was like, you know, as being the editor of that site for 4 years, it was like I was burnt out. And then I was like, man, I really want to retreat to an environment with other people. And bringing people together is super important because I think that in this type of collision environment, that's where really great ideas happen. And this is a photo, obviously a painting of, of a 17th century coffee house in Europe, which of course was also the birthplace of the Enlightenment. And it wasn't just because these people were drinking coffee for the first time after having been drinking almost exclusively alcoholic beverages like beer and wine all day long. So you can imagine what might happen when you're suddenly imbibing a stimulus as opposed to being somewhat drunk all day long, and how that might really help you generate new ideas and insights and lead to innovation. But it was also that these spaces were convening spaces. They were a space where people from all kinds of walks of life, craftsmen, merchants, philosophers, scientists were coming together to have coffee and a conversation. I kind of want to play a short video. It's about 4 minutes long. It's this guy who looks at architectural spaces where ideas come from, and I feel like he does a really good job of talking about some of this. So if I can find this video, I will play it. Here we go.
For the past 5 years, I've been investigating this question of where good ideas come from. It's a kind of problem I think all of us are intrinsically interested in. We want to be more creative, we want to come up with better ideas, we want our organizations to be more innovative. I've looked at this problem from an environmental perspective. What are the spaces that have historically led to unusual rates of creativity and innovation? And what I found in all of these systems, there are these recurring patterns that you see again and again that are crucial to creating environments that are unusually innovative. One pattern I call the slow hunch, that breakthrough ideas almost never come in a moment of great insight, in a sudden stroke of inspiration. Most important ideas take a long time to evolve, and they spend a long time dormant in the background. It isn't until the idea has had 2 or 3 years, sometimes 10 or 20 years to mature, that it suddenly becomes accessible to you and useful to you in a certain way. And this is partially because good ideas normally come from the collision between smaller hunches, so that they form something bigger than themselves. So you see a lot in the history of innovation, cases of someone who has half of an idea. There's a great story about the invention of the World Wide Web and Tim Berners-Lee. This is a project that Berners-Lee worked on for 10 years. But when he started, he didn't have a full vision for this new medium he was going to invent. He started working on one project as a side project to help him organize his own data. He scrapped that after a couple of years, and he started working on another thing. And only after about 10 years did the full vision of the World Wide Web come into being. That is, more often than not, how ideas happen. They need time to incubate, and they spend a lot of time in this partial hunch form. The other thing that's important when you think about ideas this way is that when ideas take form in this hunch state, they need to collide with other hunches. Oftentimes, the thing that turns a hunch into a real breakthrough is another hunch that's lurking in somebody else's mind. And you have to figure out a way to create systems that allow those hunches to come together and turn into something bigger than the sum of their parts. That's why, for instance, the coffee house in the age of the Enlightenment, or the Parisian salons of modernism, were such engines of creativity, because they created a space where ideas could mingle and swap and create new forms. When you look at the problem of innovation from this perspective, it sheds a lot of important light on the debate we've been having recently about what the internet is doing to our brains. Are we getting overwhelmed with an always connected, multitasking lifestyle? And is that going to lead to less sophisticated thoughts as we move away from the slower, deeper, contemplative state of reading, for instance? Obviously, I'm a big fan of reading. But I think it's important to remember that the great driver of scientific innovation and technological innovation has been the historic increase in connectivity and our ability to reach out and exchange ideas with other people, and to borrow other people's hunches and combine them with our hunches and turn them into something new. That really has, I think, been, more than anything else, the primary engine of creativity and innovation over the last 600 or 700 years. And so yes, it's true we're more distracted. But what has happened that is really miraculous and marvelous over the last 15 years is that we have so many new ways to connect and so many new ways to reach out and find other people who have that missing piece that will complete the idea we're working on, or to stumble serendipitously across some amazing new piece of information that we can use to build and improve our own ideas. That's the real lesson of where good ideas come from, that chance favors the connected mind.
So you wrote a book about this, you could read more about that. And I played this video, even though it's maybe a little bit cheesy, but like, I relate to it. Like, I lived that. I live that every day. And as someone who kind of, grew up on the internet, so to speak, that is the world that I know, that is how I make sense of things. And I think that's also why this kind of cross-pollinated space is one where I feel most at home and most energized in. So let me bring this back to New Ink. And I think of New Ink as this collection of hunches that is greater than the sum of its parts. There's a lot of people trying to invent new things there, and some of them may work out and some of them may not. And oftentimes through being in a shared workspace together, new opportunities, new insights present themselves. New Ink was founded by New Museum's director, Lisa Phillips, and deputy director, Karen Wong. And it's the first museum-led incubator for art, design, and technology. They were inspired by some of the museum's other programs, dealing with art and technology, like Rhizome, and kind of art and civic engagement, Art in the City, which was a festival that they do called Idea City. And these types of activities are not usual for most museums. I mean, I think in this day and age when museums are really trying to reinvent themselves, they're becoming more common forms of experimentation, but they're really part of the New Museum's DNA in a way. The New Museum was founded in 1977 with a mission of supporting new art and new ideas. And throughout its history, it's kind of been this like radical, future-leaning underdog that is driven by experimentation and risk-taking. They've been referring to themselves as an incubator for artists and curators and cultural practitioners throughout their almost 40-year history. And so, New Ink is kind of an extension of that mission and an opportunity to experiment with new ways of implementing it, and also of making an impact in our city's creative industry. In designing New Ink, we studied and drew inspiration from many existing programs that occupy similar spaces, and we set about building a community and professional development program geared towards creatives exploring culture, technology, and the entrepreneurship aspect of what will help those ideas kind of find a voice and a self-sustaining life in the world. New Ink is not an artist residency, it is not a co-working space or an academic program or a tech incubator, but it is informed by all of these spaces. We're attempting to forge something that responds to our current cultural and economic landscape, as well as a very specific community of these kinds of hybrid practitioners that are emerging today. Our mission and ambition with New Ink is to help amplify the impact of culture by giving artists and designers the tools to build successful businesses in support of their ideas, and also to promote experimentation. We want to fuse artistic provocation with the entrepreneurial spirit to enable ideas that make culture better. And this is what I mean when I say that we're still working on things. I'm not really happy with that, but it's the best that I've got so far, so that's something to share with you today. It means that we're not just focused in ideas that are turning a profit or building the next killer app, but in making some kind of meaningful contribution through our world, whether it's through creative expression or through business. The entrepreneurship aspect, I want to talk about that a little bit because it's the one that feels most out of place in the context of a museum, arts program, but a really important one. New York City is one of the most expensive cities in the world, and that makes it a kind of hostile environment for creative professionals, especially if you're just starting out. So we graduate, and it's kind of fitting being here talking about this, we graduate more art and design graduates than any other US city. And many of them want to stay and build their businesses here, but an overwhelming 88% feel ill-equipped to do so, due to a lack of hands-on training. 88%, that's crazy, just is. But I think part of it is also because creatives don't like talking about money. They feel like business is a dirty word. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like half of my friends are borderline Marxists, and the idea that I'm running an incubator is like so distasteful to them. But at the same time, it's like no matter what we think of capitalism, we're also kind of hopelessly bound to it. And I'm of the opinion that you're better off informed and knowing how to navigate these systems than kind of just being subjected to them. We're also living through an incredible change in the nature of work. Suddenly everyone's becoming a freelancer, an independent contractor, a small business owner, where quitting our day jobs, lured by the promise of empowerment and emancipation, or in some cases those full-time jobs are going away in favor of contract positions, whether we like it or not. And the fact of the matter is that being your own boss, and eventually, hopefully, the boss of others, opens you up to a whole mess of potential pitfalls and vulnerabilities that, frankly, most creative professionals I know are really ill-equipped to take on. And short of going after an MBA, there are a few resources in place to help them really navigate these legal and financial skills in an ongoing fashion. So that was one of the things that felt really crucial to incorporate into New Ink, and also to help us really rise to the occasion of calling ourselves an incubator. We wanted to fill that gap between the artist residency and the startup accelerator, which privileges a certain kind of business which is all about exponential returns on investment and scalability. That's not what we're about. We think it's fine if you want to be a business of one. I'm kind of the opinion that an artist is a small business too, one, unless they have a studio with many assistants, in which case it's more than one. But the idea is to function almost like a think tank or research lab, a co-working space that brings together a curated community of like-minded peers who are all trying to answer the same question, which is how do I build a sustainable creative practice driven by experimentation and invention? And currently we serve 80 full and part-time members as well as 2 anchor tenants, the digital arts organization Rhizome and Columbia University's GSAP incubator. Now I want to talk a little bit about our community because this is one of the most important aspects of New Ink and the one that relates most closely to the title of this talk. And this community is comprised of 3 kind of categories of members. There are independent artists and designers. There are small studios. These are typically people who are doing like client work to pay the bills, but have this other agenda on the side where they're trying to do more R&D or self-initiated projects that are more creative. Sometimes they have a more artistic context in which they're presented in, sometimes not. But they have a vision for the kind of practice that they want to do. It's not necessarily the kind of work that pays the bills, but they want to develop that. And we also have startups that are in the space. And these are people who are building a digital or physical product. It could be a fashion platform. It could be a new kind of video, independent film creative platform. And their fields of expertise are incredibly diverse. In fact, we select for diversity in New Ink. We kind of curate it as an ecosystem where it's like, a little bit of you, a little bit of this. It's like, what happens when we put web developers next to architects, next to fashion designers, next to motion graphics designers, next to musicians, people who are doing 3D printing, gaming, product design, cryptocurrency, interactive architecture, virtual reality, and dance. That is like a very kind of loose snapshot of some of the disciplines in the space. And the intention is that they will teach one another. And so we actively promote skill shares in the community where they're kind of sharing their own expertise with each other, exchanging ideas, knowledge, and trying to facilitate collaboration. And this is not something that we necessarily do in the sense of like pairing people up and be like, now you will work together. More so it's something that happens organically. Oftentimes we refer members to each other when they're looking for a certain kind of skill set. But also important to note here is that many of these folks are already working in a sort of hybrid and interdisciplinary way. So oftentimes you'll see someone who studied architecture but is now developing a virtual reality experience or product, or somebody who studied fashion but is now studying code so that they can do some sort of wearable technology thing. So they are working in between usually 2 or more disciplines. So they're already kind of primed for this way of thinking and combining influences from the external New Ink community. So at New Ink, one of the things that we try to encourage is the exploration of these new ideas, but also because these ideas often sit outside of traditional paradigms or disciplines or schools of thought. There isn't necessarily a clear market for them or a clear way forward. So, oftentimes they have to kind of investigate new business models in support of those ideas or new strategies for sustaining an experimental practice. And so at New Ink, we look at everything, all of the different ways that artists and entrepreneurs are supporting their work, which could range from grant funding to VC funding to crowdfunding via Kickstarter. We have a lot of events, a lot of like talks and workshops, tackling the brass tacks things like financial modeling and intellectual property, but also like more inspirational things like doing a session on the blockchain and the artistic and economic uses of the blockchain. We've also been bringing in leading practitioners to give talks and meet with our members one-on-one and facilitating mentorship. We're supported by a great advisory council, and on the subject of mentorship and advisors, I should also note a different interpretation of the title of this talk is Networks as Generators of Creativity, where, and this is also why in-person matters so much to me, is because it's about people. It's about relationships. It's about, not just combining information to produce new information, but also in the network that will help that information find an audience or help that idea, be brought to life. We help our members bring their ideas to life by, having 2 kind of demo days, presentation days, where we have a curated group of guests that includes VCs, but also gallery directors, creative directors, influential voices from the worlds of art and design and tech. I want to talk a little bit about some of the collaborations that happened at New Ink in our first year, and there were a lot of them. So many of them, in fact, that when we were thinking about, okay, well, how do we show the output of New Ink's first year? Like, what does it even mean? How do we even show something that spans everything from a performance with food art to a mobile app? Like, I don't even know. So we decided that we would showcase the collaborative projects that came out of New Ink's first year. Many of these are still kind of in the experiment stage. They're more playful. They're things that people developed on the side as just a fun project that scratched a curious itch for them. But each one of the projects in the showcase was the result of 2 or more members coming together to develop something new. do. And again, I'm going to play a very short video. It's about 15 minutes. It's about 5 minutes. I'm sorry. 15 would be really long. I guess it's not that good. It almost happened. Actually.
So with New Ink, it's an environment for artists and technologists working in that kind of weird intersection between the art side and the technology side.
Let's do it at the same time.
New Ink is the world's first museum-led incubator. For New Ink's showcase, we wanted to show some of the really amazing collaborative projects that came together from the meeting of the minds that occurred during New Ink's first year.
And it's kind of cool to be sitting next to your heroes. And do you like sitting next to your heroes?
We partnered with Red Bull to stage the showcase and to give a venue and a platform for some of these ideas that wouldn't have had an opportunity to be realized otherwise.
Is the evolution of my interest in collaboration. This is my project where I explore what it is to collaborate with a robot and a non-human entity.
This installation is called Snowblind. It's an ephemeral installation of cloud architecture that tries to imagine what new forms the built environment could take on in the future.
Gift Booth is the coolest photo booth in the world because it's not photo booths and it's animated GIFs.
The counterpointer is it's a generative sequencer that allows a user to input a melody and responds with a bass and a soprano voice that follows the rules of counterpoint.
So the Cotton Candy Theremin is an interactive project that uses the gestures of spinning cotton candy to trigger different sound and visuals.
Specimen is an iPhone game. It's minimalist and addictive, and it centers around color perception.
Luma is a sound responsive light installation made of fiber optic spheres.
Edge of the Universe is an interactive installation. The musical instruments were designed for Little Dragon to perform on. But now for the second iteration at Red Bull Studios, we are opening up the instruments to the public.
Looks like a mix between a jellyfish and a spaceship.
I think everyone has, along the way, provided some advice at New Ink or at some other event to further their projects and ideas into what they are today. And I think that's what New Ink was fundamentally built on, is collaboration, and I think that's what every creative project should be based on, is a culmination of a lot of creative people throwing out ideas.
We've never even had an office before, even though we just had like a desk at New Ink. It represented a lot, meeting a lot of collaborators and being part of the community. But it really is an incubator in the true sense.
Alright, I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I think you get the point, and I think for us, you know, it's it's New Ink's first year. This is what comes out of it. What is the context for presenting this work? As a museum, it's not necessarily something that we would put in our galleries. A lot of it is very much kind of an exploration of people trying to synthesize these various forms of input, trying to make sense of this mediated world that we live in by exploring, how to collaborate on a drawing with a robot, or by experimenting around using gestures that we do around food in new ways to trigger visuals and sound. It's like these ideas are wild. What is the application of them? I don't know. That's not the point. The point is that they're exploring something new. They're trying to invent something, and they are doing so through the exchange that this space has allowed them to do. And I'm really curious to see where these projects go, and where these relationships go, more importantly. Again, this is another project that came out of New Ink in its first year. This was a project that a lot of the studios at New Ink kind of came together around. This was a combination of an architecture studio, a sound engineering kind of spatial design studio, motion graphics studio, working with one of New Ink's mentors, Ghostly International music label, to create an interactive sound installation that was on display in New Ink's building next door to the museum for about a week in August. This is a crazy project called Blastosphere, which again was the collaboration of 3 teams at New Ink. These are all commercial projects, by the way, that came together. One is a fashion platform called Print All Over Me. It's a platform where users can go upload an image and create custom garments out of their own designs. They also work with a lot of great artists and designers to create kind of capsule collections. The other is a platform called New Hive, which is sort of a new multimedia platform for creative expression. It's really beloved by a lot of internet artists who are using it to create all kinds of interesting work. And the third is another kind of platform called Reify. And Reify uses computer vision to encode objects with media. Typically they've been working with musicians encoding these kind of 3D printed sculptures with sound. So they worked with a band to release some singles on these like kind of physical totems. But in this case, they decided that they would all join forces. And what's happening here is New Hive commissioned some of their artists to create works that then became wearable objects that were encoded with the animated artworks that through Reify, the computer vision platform. This is just wild to me. Like, I don't even know what, but it's exploring a new idea. And when I think about it, I'm like, in the future, when augmented reality is the norm, maybe this is something that we all do. Our clothing becomes performative. Our clothing becomes art. Maybe like 10, 15 years from now, I'll be looking back at this and being like, this is what fashion looks like now. I don't know. But right now I'm looking at it and being like, this is like the wackiest thing I've seen in a while. Anyway, wanted to kind of bring it back to some of our goals. Vibrant interdisciplinary community. That's the place that, we started, and the place that I think we've been most successful so far. Establishing a new platform in support of creative work that I feel like doesn't really have many outlets. That's been another thing that has kind of been part of my trajectory, is looking at new kinds of work that doesn't fit into existing ecosystems and trying to find new platforms for it. Investigating new models in support of that work. And maintaining this kind of critical perspective when it comes to technology. So you know, we don't want to simply fetishize it. We also want to really kind of dig into it and take it apart and put it back together and see if it still makes sense. We got cut off a little bit. We want to expand our cultural impact through collaborations with civic and industry partners. And we also want to make an impact on the way that our city is evolving, and to make sure that we can contribute to the creative economic landscape of New York. So, you know, one of the things that we want to do is to re-envision the incubator model to foster cultural value through ideas, through relationships, as well as capital value. And that is something that we are developing with the program. To bring it all home, I'm going to end it with a cat gif, as my friend Rick Webb suggested. And that is all that I have for you today. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. All right, if you want to come over and have a seat, we're going to have I'll kick off a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience, which expanded while you were talking. Very nice to see. Cool, I think, yeah. Our bulky retro mics.
I love this.
Borrowed from our podcasting studio. So, can you talk to us a little more about just how the incubator is curated? And you said you tried to create a great mix, diverse group. And right now, how are they? There's full-time members or part-time members, and at what frequency are they cycling through, and how does new freshness come into it?
Sure. So we run on an annual cycle. The people in our program join in September. They kind of graduate in August, and we have given an option to extend for a second year. So there's right now a lot of people who have extended for a second year. About half of our current community are returning, which we think is great, because we're like, oh, you guys like us, you came back. But we wanted to give it a cutoff point, because we wanted to kind of continue opening it up to fresh talent. And we look for, first of all, people who have a very clearly articulated vision. They know what they want to create. They have an idea for it. Maybe they've already started, and they have a sense of a roadmap. We expect that roadmap will change, but the thing that we learned in our first year is that we can be most impactful with the people who know what they need from us, or are able to ask for what they need, in a way, right? And so whether you're an artist or a designer, kind of more creative practitioner, or a business, kind of having that sense of clarity about your work and where you want to take it is important for us, and for us to help you be successful, and for us to be successful as a result of that. The other thing that we look for is, in trying to create an interdisciplinary space that is quite diverse, we look for people who have what I would call like a generosity of spirit. And this is more just about like an openness, like a curiosity, a desire to learn, but also to teach. And that's been something that's been, I think, really important to the culture of the program. And that's one of the things that we also try to kind of foster in the programming itself. But fundamentally, I think it starts with the people and how they interact with one another. So we started the program off by saying, like, we want this to be a collaborative space, and within the first month we had an event for like some of our trustees or whatever, and I was like, so how many people have started collaborations? And like nearly every hand in the room went up. Some of those never materialized, but the fact that the people were open to that was really important to creating that dynamic. And then the other thing that's really nice about having this space that's so mixed, as opposed to the somewhat homogenous communities that you can find in like a Techstars, for instance, is that it's not competitive. People are super supportive of each other and they want one another to succeed. They're going to make introductions for you. They're going to like, you know, promote your work and be like really collegial, because you're not competing for the same resources necessarily. And that I think also makes it a really great environment. I have to say though that, you know, one of the reasons that we're going through this like grappling is because it makes it really hard from kind of an institutional administrative perspective, because, you know, the needs of an artist versus a startup are vastly different. And ultimately, I think like there's a lot that cuts across. And the more time like I've spent doing this, the more time it's just like it feels the same to me. It's like the story that you tell to a grants committee versus the story that you tell at a VC pitch meeting is virtually the same. It's just the language that you're using is slightly different. The things that you emphasize are going to be slightly different, but it's essentially the same story. And like that's the thing that I think is really nice about New Ink is like you're gonna have an artist that's exposed to like venture capital, even though they may not ever consider it, like they're just gonna have an understanding of it, and have a startup exposed to artists who are very critical of capitalism and be challenged by that. And that tension, I think, although it can produce some really bad days for me, is really great ultimately. Like it's worth it.
Just to go back to the collaborations for a second. So it sounds like most of them came together fairly organically. Were you surprised about some of the matchups that happened?
Totally. I mean, like that last project I showed with the dresses, I like did not see that coming. I was like, what? They had to explain it to me 3 times before I like really understood what it was. But it was great because like it's not something that I would have ever conceived of, that these 3 companies could have joined forces in this way to produce this experiment. And it was a really wonderful experiment that made me think about, you know, the future of fashion and expression and all of these things and how we construct identities through the things that we wear. But, you know, it's like it's rarer to see the startups collaborate in a way. Mm-hmm. Although I have to say that Print All Over Me, the fashion startup, they're like collaboration whores. Like they've collaborated with everyone, just collaborations all day, every day. They actually launch a new collaboration on their site every week. Like I can't even keep up. And we've done some collaborations with them at the new museum. They actually made a really beautiful silk dress for the Chris O'Feely show that we did last year, and a couple of other things. But yeah, they're like literally everywhere.
So just to pull back a little bit, you know, you were talking about when you were thinking of creating the Art Tech Meetup, you know, just how, you know, use the word siloed, which is a word I like a lot, these different cultural organizations were with regard to how they were engaging with technology. And, you know, in trying to kind of break down some of those barriers, you know, you've created these groups, but in the incubator space is an effort now to sort of empower creative individuals to, you know, be viable, successful in their professions. And what do you see as, you know, kind of the next challenge for yourself, if you will, in terms of barriers regarding art and technology?
Oh God, I mean, people ask me like what the next thing is, and I'm like, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure this one out. Like I got my hands full for a couple of years still. I think in a way we still have somewhat of a communications problem, because I struggle with explaining this to people who aren't used to working in this way or thinking in this way. They struggle to present themselves to the world because the world wants to put you in a very specific box that can be neatly described. And whether that is, you know, a journalist who's writing a story who's trying to, like, you know, say, well, you know, are you a designer or are you an artist? Or, and they're like, well, I'm both. And that doesn't work for a lot of people still. And, you know, I think having these spaces, and that's another thing that's really important about these spaces, is like, a lot of the people who come to New Ink are like, oh my God, I feel like I have found my tribe. Like, I don't feel like an outcast anymore. Or somebody described it to me as like, I don't know comic books very well, but like the X-Men, like they're all the like mutant superheroes, and like this is like the X-Men school or something. I don't know. But yeah, that's like a metaphor that somebody used. And so in this space, they have shared understanding. They have a shorthand. They understand each other's way of working implicitly, in a way. The processes might be new, but this way of working is familiar. And that's not necessarily the case in many other environments that they might go into. And I think that that's rapidly changing. But in some ways, I think we are limited probably most by language. And that's one of the things that I personally struggle with, is just like, you know, trying the mental exercise of trying to find new terms, but then having to explain to people what those new terms are that you've just invented. Which,
Well, you're doing an excellent job. So, audience, do you have some questions? Lorena's going to be passing around our mic. Okay, we have one back here.
Hi. New Ink sounds awesome, but I have a question regarding how closely it actually does follow the model of an incubator. So are the groups or the peoples, the individuals that come in, are they given funding to pursue their, no?
So we don't take equity, and we don't give funding. In a sense, right now, it functions like a co-working space with a lot of scholarships and subsidies, which we've been like working to build out more. But part of our sort of mandate from the museum was also to experiment with a new program model that could, in effect, be self-sustaining. So we were like, all right, well, we have 8,000 square feet, and if we charge people $600 a month and have X amount of people, we can cover our overhead and expenses. And certainly we're going out and we're, you know, applying for grants and fundraising and doing all of that, but we didn't want the program to be sort of vulnerable to the whimsy of grants that can be there today and gone tomorrow. And that's something that I think is a sort of institutional pressure that a lot of museums are feeling, and nonprofits in general, where it's like, you need to have earned revenue and not be exclusively reliant on philanthropy, because philanthropy is increasingly compromised in terms of like being something that you can really depend on.
So were those projects that we saw mostly self-funded?
Most of them, I mean, as I mentioned, a lot of them do commercial work. They do client work to pay the bills, and they're increasingly trying to wean themselves off of it. Print All Over Me is one that is like profitable, sort of. They were exploring taking, say, venture capital last year. They decided against it. They took a bank loan instead. You know, they can do that. Other people are raising angel funding for the startups. Angel funding with the hope of, you know, raising a seed round or a Series A or whatever. Most of the artists are funded through grants, teaching, and you know, selling their work, Kickstarter, you know, a lot of things. Some of the more ambitious projects. So this year we have a couple of immersive theater projects in the mix. One of which raised like $80,000 on Kickstarter, but is now looking, you know, at say Broadway producers that maybe want to get involved and like help fund it. I mean, that's the avenues for funding things at New Inc. are quite broad, which is very different from a traditional incubator, which would only focus on things that are venture backable. And because we don't take equity, that's not something that we necessarily select for.
If you can create a self-sustaining model, do you see it becoming replicable or something you would expand to other places?
I hope so.
I have a question to follow up. On to other places, you mentioned the 88% that graduates unprepared. Right? Can this collaborative incubator be a model for schools? And is that something you're trying to start talking to institutions about in the city?
It's a really good question, and I would love to work with schools. I mean, actually, this year, one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is like, are there business programs that we can collaborate with? Because, you know, as a museum, we don't necessarily, like, business isn't our domain expertise. Culture is, but not business. And, you know, I've been really fortunate to be able to have a great network and the museum's network to draw from in terms of people who speak both the language of culture and business, who can come in and do some of the workshops and programs, the professional development programs. But boy, would it be easier to work with a university that, you know, maybe has an existing business program that can help us design a new curriculum, because we're essentially kind of trying to make it up from scratch and sort of translate, if you will. I know that, for instance, there's a very different program called 30 Weeks that Google runs, which is for designer founders. And that program more closely follows a traditional incubator model. It's like, you know, they teach the lean startup methodology. It's like iterate, validate, it's ideate, validate, iterate, something like that. I don't know. But it's more for like these types of like startups that intend to scale, intend to pursue equity, and only those kinds of startups. And I know that they have worked with, say, Parsons and SVA, I believe also, and a couple of other schools. We have Columbia in our space right now, but yeah, collaborating with schools. We should do more of that. It's something that we're thinking about.
I'm sure students are open to it.
Do we have any incubator members in the audience?
I don't think so.
No?
None that I recognize.
No. Any more questions? Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the diversity of different disciplines of the practitioners in your space, and I'm wondering, especially we hear a lot about the lack of diversity, especially in tech startups. And so how do you, like just looking at your documentation and your photos, it seems like you've been able to build a diverse community both in terms of gender and underrepresented minorities. So can you talk about how you address that as a community?
It's been something that's been really important to us from the start, and it's not something that happens on its own. It requires extensive legwork on our part. And outreach. I mean, man, like, is it hard to find people of color and women? Like, it's hard. And part of what we're trying to do is oftentimes those folks are put off by the cost, so we've been creating some scholarships. Part of it is just trying to develop new networks, because maybe our network isn't as strong at reaching those people. So working with friendly partners who can help spread the word to communities that are not necessarily our community. But you really have to make it a priority, because it doesn't just happen. And it's something that I think was important to us, partially because like New Inc. is a female-run organization. New Museum is a female-run organization, and that was one of the things that like made me super excited about working there, especially coming from a very male-dominated place like Vice. But you know, it takes a lot of time and effort, and quite frankly, I sometimes still don't feel like we're doing a good enough job of it. One of the things that we are thinking about is how we can connect to and help cultivate talent earlier on. So we're talking to one group that works with high school students, and that was actually one of the photos, like high school students that they are exposing to kind of new technology, new media, doing some training at that age. And we're wondering, like, okay, well, part of the problem is that there isn't a huge pool of talent to draw from to begin with. Mainly because a lot of these folks don't necessarily have access to this training and information. It's not something that is a default for them. So, can we work with students at an earlier age and almost kind of track them until they're ready for New Ink? I don't know. But it seems like it's something that you have to kind of start at the root of the problem instead of like just hoping that it solves for you.
Any more questions? Yep.
So I know you have been working with people, and especially like the Arts Tech Meetup and all of that. Like, you have been kind of like, trying to create these collisions for a really long time. When you started, was it like obvious how to do that, or you were just like, these people need to start talking, let's get them together, start talking? I mean, because obviously like that was a way more public thing where you couldn't really select for this sort of like interdisciplinary thing. I mean, did it just grow, and so then that's how like the explosion started happening? Or can you talk more about like the intentionality around the collisions?
Sure. Well, first of all, I have to say that like my background initially is in journalism. So like I studied journalism, and what that meant was one of my editors really liked to say that journalists are a mile wide and an inch deep. We are generalists by trade, which basically means that like I was used to going into different communities, like trying to learn and understand and synthesize as much as possible, write an article on them, and like, not move on, but like, have the next assignment. And this like process of constantly learning, cross-referencing different inputs of knowledge, that's just like something that was really intuitive to me. When it came time to start the meetup, the reason that happened is because I landed at startups in New York, and I was like working in startups as an editor and seeing publishing kind of crumble around me. And was like, all right, well, I'm not doing that. And decided that I was going to kind of really dedicate myself to understanding like digital media, digital strategy, but really had no interest in doing it from a marketing perspective, which was like kind of where the jobs were at the time. So I was like, all right, what is happening around digital media and culture? Because if I'm doing marketing for a museum, for instance, or digital strategy for a museum, that feels like education. That feels like advocacy. Like I could get behind that. And Arts Tech came out of my like desire to learn. I really was. The first thing that happened was I basically went on Twitter and I followed every single museum on Twitter. There weren't very many at the time. And like every kind of museum professional, and kind of kept like, doing this like breadcrumb trail of like trying to capture all of the people who were working in this space. And they all talked online with each other. But when I had my first meetup, so many of them met for the first time. Like they were constantly in communication online. They were peers in the field, working in the same city, but they had never met in person. It was crazy to me. I was like, what? How? And so the meetup in a way came from this like desire to learn and my desire to connect with these people in order to learn. And inadvertently, as a result, I ended up connecting them to each other, which was why the meetup became powerful. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't by design. I literally didn't know where it was going to lead. It was just kind of following my own curiosity to a certain extent.
Great. Well, in the name of meeting up and hopefully making some new connections, I invite everybody to join us in the studio next door. I feel like we should be serving coffee rather than beer and wine after your lecture, but we'll hopefully go, not get too tipsy. But thank you all for coming, and let's give Julia a big hand.